Welcome to Between the Reads, where Black books are shared and celebrated all year long. I'm your host, Audra Russell. There are so many great things going on this year as I continue to amplify Black stories, but I can't do it without your support. Please consider heading over to patreon.com/betweenthereads and becoming a member, or make a one-time donation at www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. Are you ready, boys and bros? Then sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Akindele Decker, a grandson of Thomas A.L. Decker. He is a poet, writer, and historian born in Sierra Leone. His poems cover topics dealing with the Middle Passage, identity, and African history. In 2012, he performed Dancing in Blue Waters at Busboys and Poets in Washington, D.C., chronicling the Middle Passage of the transatlantic slave trade. In 2016, he worked with GWB Commission's One campaign, celebrating the diverse ancestral heritage of Sierra Leoneans. He has served as a panelist and presenter for several platforms, including the American Association of State and Local History on the topic of intercultural identity, and Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center on Maroon Culture and the Global African Diaspora. He is co-founder of African Curator, a Maryland-based company that publishes history books for children and installs historical markers, curating the Middle Passage. He resides in Maryland, USA, with his family. Nadine Decker is a granddaughter of Thomas A.L. Decker and lives in London with her 2 cats. Although this is her first time writing a book, it has always been a dream. She is currently working in compliance for a charity and is studying her MSc in organizational psychology. In her free time, she likes to make skincare products and is very much enjoying the process of learning about her roots in Sierra Leone, whilst working with Akindele and sharing her grandfather's work. Akindele, Nadine, welcome to Between the Reads.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna need y'all both to bring that energy up. Akindele, it's the morning time here in Maryland, so you good. Now, Nadine has an excuse because she says she's had a long day. It's like 4 p.m. where she is.
Oh, definitely. But thank you so much for having us. We're very pleased to be here.
My pleasure. So you have 2 books, Why Mr. Bird Chose the Air, and Why All the Animals No Longer Live Together. Before we get into where the stories came from, tell us briefly what these 2 books are about.
All right. And I'll talk about one, and my cousin can talk about the other.
All right.
But these 2 stories are essentially West African folktales from Sierra Leone. They were written originally by our grandfather, Thomas Decker. He published them originally in the 1950s. And his book consists of about 20-something or so folktales. So we decided to take some of them and give it to, retell them, essentially. So Why Mr. Bird Chose the Air, it's an interesting folktale. It's about cousin Tommy and cousin Talabi. Cousin Tommy is based on our grandfather, Grandpa Tommy, and also it includes their grandfather, Grandpa TC. So it takes place in Moritown, in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and you're introduced to an array of animal characters: Mr. Bird, Mrs. Bird, Mr. Goat, Mr. Dog. And it's, I don't want to go too much into what it is just yet, in case we touch on that later, but it's an interesting experience of Grandpa TC telling his grandson and granddaughter about this story and them learning about, what happened to Mr. Bird.
Okay.
So we may find more about that later.
Okay. And Nadine, you want to tell us about the other book?
Yeah, so why all the animals no longer live together. It features some of the same animals in the book that Akindele just spoke about. So a lot of the folk tales are quite related. So you
Mm-hmm.
just have you come to know some of the characters. They've got themes, and then this story now just teaches some kind of lessons, I would say, throughout the book in terms of behaviors and attitudes of certain animals and how their actions can cause issues in the village. Again, it has the same format whereby the story is told by our grandfather to the cousins, and then the story is lived out throughout the book. But yeah, they're really interesting.
Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about where the stories came from. Tell us who Thomas Dekker is. I love the
Thomas
way
Deck.
Nadine always looks at you like, handle it.
He's the historian. He's the historian amongst us.
Okay.
Nadine hasn't accepted it yet fully, but I believe that she is just as much a historian as I am.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start looking over there too soon. No, but Thomas Dekker, as we mentioned earlier, is our grandfather. He's my dad's dad and Nadine's dad's dad as well. Um, he was born in 1916. He was born in Calabar, Nigeria. He was born to Sierra Leonean parents who moved over there to work. He spent his early years there, and then I want to say in the 1920s, he relocated back to Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone, he led a career as a journalist, playwright, a poet. He was also a sculptor as well. And in the 1930s, one of the things that he set out to do was to prove, because back in that day, Sierra Leone was a British colony. So he wanted to, and we have our local language called Creole, which is similar to like a Jamaican patois, or similar to what they speak in the Gullah Geechee corridor down in South Carolina. So he wanted to prove to the colonial authorities and to Sierra Leoneans in general that Creole was an official language. And so he started writing articles and poems and different things, just translating them into Creole to show that, we can actually write Creole as well as we can speak it. So over the years, he did that for about, I want to say, 40 something years. In the 1960s, he also became the first permanent secretary for information in Sierra Leone. He also played a part in the establishment of the Sierra Leone Broadcasting Service, which is our national TV station. So he did a lot. But one of the main things that he's known about is his Creole translations. He translated Shakespeare's Julius Caesar into Creole in the 1960s, the whole book. And this was one of his stellar works. In the 1950s, he wrote Tales of the Forest, which is a collection of Sierra Leonean folktales, taken from mainly the Creole, but also taken from some of the other ethnic groups as well. So he was a very, driven writer. He was a linguist, but he never actually went to school to be a linguist. So a lot of what he inputted into the Creole language was sort of self-taught. And he is actually credited as one of the first to develop a writing system for the language, for Creole.
And for my listeners out there, it's Creole, Krio, not Creole. Like where, you might hear it and you might be thinking Creole. Yeah.
Right.
So it's Creole. Yes, I was reading about that. That's very interesting. So you talked a little bit about it. He was born in Calabar, Nigeria, but he moved to Sierra Leone and grew up in Freetown. Now, I read a little bit about that. I would like for you to share with our readers the history of Freetown in Sierra Leone.
I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing history, but I feel like it's an amazing history that we may not know too much of. But Freetown was started in 1792. Interestingly, it was actually started by black settlers who came from here, from America. A lot of them fought in the American Revolutionary War, but they fought on the side of the British. So this is why after the war was over, they had to leave along with the British themselves. They found themselves in Canada and eventually found themselves in Africa, in West Africa. And they were actually the first westernized free community of blacks that went from this side back to Africa.
Wow.
So they went into Sierra Leone, cleared the land, and they called it Freetown in 1792. A lot of them were from Virginia. Some of them were from South Carolina, some from Philadelphia, but it was about 1,000 plus. So they went, founded in 1792, and then in 1800, about 500 Jamaicans, Jamaican Maroons, came into Freetown as well to settle the same small area. So now you have the black settlers from America and also the Jamaican Maroons. And then between 1807 and the 1860s, about, I want to say 90,000 plus West Africans who were originally captured to be enslaved in the Americas, but never made it over because their ships were seized on off the Atlantic. And instead of, them being taken back to where they came from originally, they were all sent to Freetown and settled around there. So essentially, by the 1860s, you had different villages that were established in Freetown. You had, I think by 1850s, a German linguist said that there were at least 100 African languages in Freetown. And, obviously not counting the Americans, the Jamaicans, so that's Freetown in a nutshell. It's
that's a big nutshell.
a huge nutshell. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I had never heard of Freetown. There's a Freetown here in Maryland, which was a community that was built by formerly enslaved black people. So when I heard Freetown, when I was reading on your website, I was like, I wonder if it's the same kind of premise, and it is. But it's interesting that there's so many cultures there. I wonder, can you still see all of that as you go there now? Can you still see all the effects of that?
Everything. I mean, we have just this year actually. We celebrated the 230th anniversary of the founding of Freetown.
Wow.
We also celebrated the 230th anniversary of the oldest church in Freetown, Zion Methodist Church, which was actually started by a congregation of the black settlers from America that came. So that still exists. And many of the members of the congregation are descendants of those individuals. And then obviously the Maroons, there's also a Maroon church in Freetown as well. Same thing there. A lot of the members in the congregation are also descendants of the Maroons. And then we have these mountain villages around the Freetown Peninsula, which include villages like Hastings, Regent, Morristown also is one of them. So these villages were started by some of the recaptured Africans also called liberated Africans. So Moritown, I'll take that as an example, which is where these stories take place. Grandpa Tisi, historically, Grandpa Tisi, whose real name is Thomas Crowley Fraser, his father and I believe his mother as well, but definitely his father would have been one of those liberated Africans who was taken from Nigeria and, taken on his way to the Americas, but then sent to Moritown. And Moritown was started in, I want to say 1830. And Grandpa Tisi was born in 1844. Wow. So that sort of gives you that perspective. And this is our grandfather's grandfather who would have told them those stories in the 1920s, and, I mean, we never met our grandfather in person. But the way that a lot of these things have sort of passed down through generations, whether it be stories, whether it be culture, language, and all the food, all of these different things. I think we kind of we imagine it to be a very long period, but it's really not, especially when you consider how strong these passing down of traditions have been so far. So whether it be Creole, Timini, Mende, Limba, Sherbro, it's sort of the same thing that's going on with all of them. And Freetown is very small. Sierra Leone is very small. I think Sierra Leone might be, I'm just going to say this loosely. This is not expert opinion, but I think it's around the size of Maryland. I'm going to say loosely. So it's very small, and, I mean, in Freetown, everyone, I would say it's easy to know everyone. So, it's, So, I mean, we eat fufu. We eat fufu and we call it sawa sawa. But it's kind of like similar to the Nigerian egusi. We eat jollof rice, which is similar to the red rice in South Carolina. We, so there's a lot of stuff that's still ingrained in the culture today.
Okay. All right, Nadine, get ready to answer this question. Yeah. Sit over there being quiet. What made you and your cousin decide to turn your grandfather's stories into children's books?
I think, as Akindele has spoken about, he had a lot of work out there, and a lot of the stories that we were taught when we were younger, there was just a mass of information that we thought couldn't just stop there. And also we realized that in today's day and age, we wanted to try and adapt his writing to make it more relatable to people nowadays and more palatable for this generation. And it was just a way for us to also connect as well, because we'd never met in person.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just a good way for me in terms of just learning my history and our family's culture and background. So I think that was one of the first things that made us decide to do it, really.
Okay. So if you never met in person, how did you two end up connecting and finding each other?
Well, so we've spoken for a long time before doing this project, but the first connection, I think, was on Twitter. I just remember being in school and then seeing this person that had my surname and that literally looked like my dad. And I was like, what's this about?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, and then I think it kind of grew from there, really. And I remember asking my dad, and he was like, oh, yeah, that's your cousin. Like,
wow. Just casual. Yeah, that's your cousin. And so you reached out to him, and
then I think he reached out to me first. I think you added me, isn't that correct? And then we just started connecting on socials. But I was kind of like in school at that time and not really interested, to be fair. But then, when you get a bit older and you're like, no, this is family, And yeah, it kind of went from there, really.
So did you both grow up hearing your grandfather's stories, and then you just like you heard it from your family and you heard it from your family, and you just decided one day you were just talking and said, we need to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing actually. This is his book.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you can see it.
It's a little glary from the light,
Yeah.
but
All right. So this is the outline of the book, but there's
okay.
stuff here. But yes, essentially, I would say this is definitely the first book I ever remember reading. So even before I knew of Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny, I knew about Mr. Bird.
Okay.
And back then we would call them Bra Bird or
Okay.
Bra Tortoise or Bra, dog. So yeah, I grew up reading his book. I used to try to make my own, stories. I remember in elementary school, and it was just the culture. It's I feel like our genes are very, very strong, extremely strong. So we've always had storytellers. We've always had poets, artists, the creative elements within the family through generations. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the characters in the books. We'll go through the four main characters. I know there's a host of animal characters, but I want to focus on the human element. So we can start with Thomas Dekker, who's Cousin Tommy in the book. Tell us about Cousin Tommy. Nadine.
Cousin Tommy, I think he's just basically the learner. He's the person who is gathering or gaining the knowledge from his grandfather in the book. So I feel like when someone reads the book, they're kind of coming from his lens and learning the way he kind of got the story told towards him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then there is Grandma Amba, who's based on Amba Fraser, who's from Ghana. You want to tell us about her, Akindele?
Yes. Grandma Amba is historically she's Grandpa TC's wife.
Okay.
So she's from Ghana. Historically, I guess, Grandpa TC met Grandma Amba in Ghana while he was working there. At the time, they called it the Gold Coast. But they met there, I want to say in the 1880s or 90s. He spent, I think, about 17 years working in Ghana. So they met and they had several children there initially before relocating to Morristown. And Cousin Tommy, who is Grandpa, Tommy, his mom was their eldest daughter. So Grandma Amba, originally from Ghana, she's known to be either Fanti or Fulani or a bit of both. And there's I don't know if you saw that on the website, but there's actually a photograph of her.
Yes, I saw it.
Where she sort of has similar, clothing as what's in the book as well. But she's there. She brings in the sort of Ghanaian or the diverse element of Freetown. That it's not just Sierra Leoneans or Freetonians. There's all these elements of Ghanaian, Nigerian, and American, Caribbean influences in it as well. So she's sort of like a buttress, for the story. She adds some elements to it, and tries to keep the story grounded, because Grandpa TC can get carried away sometimes. So she's there to be like, okay, guys, let's
rein it in.
Yeah.
And then Grandpa TC is based on Thomas Fraser. Nadine, you want to tell us about him?
Yes. Grandpa TZ is based on Thomas Fraser. He actually historically went by TC.
Okay.
So they called him TC Fraser. And he was born in 1844. He passed away, I want to say 1936. So he lived very long. I think that image of his character in the book comes from a photograph of his that was taken in 1906 while he was in London. And he had a coat, an actual coat on top of the waistcoat. But he was a very successful man. He had a very large family. I believe between him and Grandma Amba, they had about 11 children.
Wow.
He was he went to Ghana and worked there as a trader. He also worked as a gold trader. He was an agent for one of the first newspapers founded in Ghana. And then relocated back to Freetown, where he served as a city councilor for along with the mayor. He was a moneylender for some time. And he was also what we call a headman for Moritown Village for some time as well. But he was he seemed like a very industrious man, but also a very cultured man as well. He was very into his identity. I do believe that one of the family stories is that he tried to go to Nigeria at some point to try to trace his family there, because obviously his dad would have been one of the liberated Africans. And he kind of instilled that culture and family into the family as well. So, right now the Frasers we're a very tight-knit family. And it's hard to sort of find an older Fraser that can't tell you the family history. Like, you find an uncle and they'll be like, yeah, so uncle, who's this person? And they'll be like, oh, that's grandpa's uncle's sister's cousin's son. So he was definitely a patriarch of the Fraser family.
Okay. And Nadine, will you tell us about the last character, Cousin Talabi? Am I saying it right?
Talabi.
Talabi, who's based on Talabi Lukan.
I'm going to have
share
to
with us.
give that one over to Akindele. As I said, he's the historian.
You going to talk in this interview before it's over?
The dates and family trees.
No.
That's Akindele's.
Okay.
So yeah, Grandma Talabi, she was a writer. She became a writer similar to Grandpa Tommy. I met her quite a few times before she passed, sadly. And she actually, told me quite a bit about the family history. She also said that she was a favorite cousin to Grandpa Tommy. She said that actually. She was like, yeah, that's my favorite cousin. I'm like, oh, really? So when we were thinking of who to include, because we didn't want to just focus it just on Cousin Tommy. We wanted to include that, give him a cousin, obviously, and let it be shown that it's not, what he inherited in terms of the stories and the culture and all of that may have inspired his journey to become a writer was not just for him. It was for his cousins as well. The same way with Nadine and I feel like we're both inspired by our grandfather and his work equally. And I feel like, I kind of see Nadine's definitely my favorite cousin. So I kind of see a lot of the cousin Tommy, cousin Talabi, cousin Akindele, cousin Nadine thing going on.
Okay.
So yeah, Grandma Talabi she was very accomplished as well. She wrote several history textbooks for schools in Sierra Leone during her time. She studied in London, and she wrote a couple of books, children's books of her own.
Okay.
One of the most well known was Geneba, which was the story of a Sierra Leonean girl
Okay.
over there. So yeah.
Okay. Now I've been saying Nadine. Is it Nadine? Is it either or?
Well, people call me Nadine, but I feel like
Nadine. Okay.
I don't mind Nadine because I think it's easier for you guys' accent. So
Okay. Okay. See, y'all, she says I have the accent, but I say she has the accent. All right, so I'm throwing this next question to you. Why do you feel these stories are important for children to hear?
I think we realized how much impact they had on us when we were growing up. The folk tales have so many lessons, and especially for people like me who I wasn't born in Sierra Leone. When you're born in the diaspora, your culture tends to fade away. But having those folk tales, having those lessons, those traditions, come through stories, I think it's an amazing way for them to filter down, and to help, just keep some of those lessons alive, and just to keep that thread throughout families, no matter where they're born or where they are in the world. So I think that even if you're not from Sierra Leone, there's still very many important lessons. And just for people, ethnic minorities in general, I think it was just a nice thing that we thought would be useful and just important, especially because there's a lack of, children's books that have those, figures who do look like them as themselves.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is one of your favorite stories out of the stories you've written?
So this is my first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say for now it is the one I like the most, only because I've had a lot of involvement around it. I think it's just the way that there are so many small lessons in a book about animals, and if you, even as an adult, you can read it and be like, oh yeah, I shouldn't really be greedy because this can come back to haunt me later on. Like, it's subtle lessons that are in the book, which I think I really do like. So I think it is why all the animals no longer live together.
Ah, okay. So how do you two feel when you look at these books of your grandfather's stories and they're out there in the world for parents to read to their children?
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think for me, it's definitely the most treasured undertaking so far, because our aunt, who is also a daughter of Grandpa Tommy, she told us some time ago that Tales of the Forest, so his original book, was taught in schools in Sierra Leone. And, she talked about having to go through, like, studying it, and it's her dad's book.
Wow.
And I feel like, and I've heard similar from other cousins as well of hers, who said, I have this book in the house, and so on and so on. So, and just knowing for our generation, Nadine and I, we also had this book. It wasn't taught in our schools, but we had it at home. And I feel like it is very impactful. And it may have been a passing thing where you're not really thinking about it. You just kind of, we either have it at home and it's like, oh, this book, like a teddy bear, or it's in schools where it's like, oh, it's just part of the curriculum. But I think that being able to bring it back, being able to put it out there in the midst of Disney and Nickelodeon characters, and which many of them are based on, I want to say, Western value systems, and Western messaging as well, which is not bad, obviously, because we here, but we also carry within us identities that, we don't necessarily have to be in Africa to be African or to have African cultural values, or, a lot of these things move with us generationally. So we need those reminders in what we read as well, or what we see, or what we identify with, beyond the Bugs Bunnies and the Tom and Jerry's. We want to see the Cousin Tommies and the Mr. Birds and Mr. Dogs, and know that this is not a new thing. This is a thing that's, Grandpa TC, because in Grandpa Tommy's book, he mentioned in the book that most of these stories were told to him by his grandfather. And if we're considering that Grandpa TC was born in 1844, maybe he heard these stories from his grandfather, who may have been born in the 1700s or something like that, who may have heard those stories from their grandfather. So there's no telling how far these characters have come. Right. But it's important that we, not just Sierra Leoneans, not just Africans, but African Americans, Caribbeans, anyone with that connection to African identity. But I think also one of the things that we tried to set out to do was to also make it so that it's universal, so that it's not just African, but it's identifiable to an Asian, to a European, to a Italian, because it's a good story. It's a fun story. And it's a story that any parent would want to read to their child, because it has a very important message inside some very colorful characters.
So your book is self-published, correct?
Yes.
So how did you two handle that, with you being in London and you being here in Maryland? Tell us about that process.
I think it was a lot of back and forth video calls, Google Docs. We just communicate pretty well. Nowadays, you can communicate with someone regardless of where you are. And I guess the biggest thing would be the time zone difference, really. But apart from that, we just, kept up with meeting and checking each other's work, and doing it that way, really.
And then what about the distribution? So you're handling it there in London, and you're handling it here in Maryland. Like, what are you guys doing specifically in your different areas to get the book out there?
So based on where someone orders from, then it will be me or Akindele that will ship it out. I must say that we have an Instagram page and try and get the message out that way. Akindele is doing some stuff over in the States. I don't necessarily have as much time to do that at this moment in time, but when I do, I want to get out to markets and things like that. And then hopefully I can go to the States, and he could come to the UK, and we can do things together, because that would be much better, definitely.
Right.
And Akindele has also got some links with people in Sierra Leone as well, haven't you?
Yeah. In addition to that, to what I would say the grassroots that Nadine mentioned, we're really trying to get this into the school systems. So we're trying to get, something happening in Sierra Leone, where, like the original book, this one can also be present there. But we're also working with individuals in different communities here as well. Our grandfather's books are in the London Library Museum. Well, I call it museum, but it's museum, right? London Library Museum or
No,
British
that's the
Library.
British.
Yeah. So our grandfather's books are in the British Library in London. We've both come across them there. So we're trying, that is also leverage in getting it out there as well, in continuing his work. On this side, we're working with the Gullah community right now, because one of the things actually that is crucial to what he did in his story was in the 1950s, I want to say 1951, an African American linguist who was probably at that time the foremost African American linguist, called Dr. Lorenzo Turner. He's also called the father of Gullah studies, because his research in the 1930s was what pretty much started the whole Gullah studies, Africanisms and Gullah studies. He went to Freetown. He went to Sierra Leone in 1951.
Okay.
While he was traveling to different places to find out what African connections were part of the Gullah identity. So Sierra Leone was one of his stops, and we came to find out just a couple of years ago through an exhibit at the Anacostia Museum in DC that they had of Dr. Turner, that apparently he worked with our grandfather while he was
wow.
there. And personally, I've been working with the Gullah community for 13 years now. And I've, been there several times. I know, some of them very well. Some of whom I call auntie as well. But we only found out that there was an actual connection between our grandfather and the Gullah language or just studies in general a couple of years ago.
Wow.
So yes, so we do know that interaction took place. And in fact, when Dr. Turner returned, he wrote a book on Creole folktales as well.
Okay.
And a book on Creole dictionary. So that's something that we're also exploring to see, because language is very important nowadays, especially. There's a lot of focus on Gullahs, the Gullah community, a lot of focus on the African aspect of the African American community. There's a lot of things going on with DNA ancestry right now. A lot of African Americans are trying to, not return back, but reconnect with their African roots. So we believe that a book like this, especially with the context of Freetown's history as well, helps to create a bridge between, folks here and folks there.
Okay.
So the book is not just important in Sierra Leone, it's important here as well, because as you're reading about these characters, you get to also think and talk about the African Americans that went there in 1792, or, transatlantic slave trade and how that impacted all of us. So it's a lot there. We're trying our best to get it as far out as possible.
Okay. So what age range would you say that these books are for kids?
We did discuss this, and I think we kind of agreed upon the age of was it 6 upwards?
Yeah, yeah,
To
Okay.
get
yeah,
a good understanding of it.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
I'd say. I think we said definitely 6. I think it was 6 to 8
Okay.
was sort of like the primary. Like they can have it and read
Mhm.
it, but honestly, just thinking of some of those who bought the book so far,
Mhm.
it's been
And
under 6. It's been above 6. So I feel
Okay.
like it's an African folktale. So it's
Okay.
like, or
So
it's a folktale in general. So I feel like it's good for anyone.
okay.
But
So I'm a parent with young kids, pretending. Tell me why I should buy your book and read it to my kids.
I think if you're just looking for a fun bedtime story with loads of nice characters to keep the children engaged, but at the same time you're slipping in a good life lesson for them, whilst also um, helping them to love themselves because they're going to see people that look like themselves, and just different animals, to help them learn as well. I think it's something good to add to their collection.
Okay. Akindele.
I agree. I think what better way to, I mean, it also introduces strong conversations. Um, you know, Very strong conversations about being greedy, about
Mm.
being, spiteful, about being, all these very strong conversations that I feel like it's kind of hard for children to understand it unless they themselves go through it. So
Mm-hmm.
why not say, hey, look at what happened to Mr. Bird?
Yeah.
Right.
you know, don't do what Mr. Bird did. So it's and these are only just the beginning. We do hope to, by God's grace, continue it at some point. So there are more opportunities to learn more lessons, and more characters will
Mm-hmm.
be introduced as well at some point. But it's also an opportunity to have them be connected to another world,
Mm-hmm.
another realm of characters, of people or animal characters that they can associate with as well.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
give us a little spoiler. What did Mr. Bird do?
Hmm. Um. Hmm. Mr. Bird definitely it definitely tells us why Mr. Bird flies
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't really about the air. It
Okay.
was this thing that he did that led him to stay up there.
Okay.
Um, but he I'm trying.
Just give us the spoiler. I mean, the parents are going to read it for the kids, so we're not spoiling it for the kids.
All right, so here's what he did. He didn't want to give up
Mm-hmm.
something that was agreed upon for him to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to find the most brilliant, cunning way to not, you know, um, do that. And, he got caught. He got caught.
I like how
And,
Nadine's just sitting over there like,
I mean, he thought he had it. He was like, "Oh, every day he's just going like, oh, let's keep doing this." And Mr. Monkey, no, Mr. Goat,
mm-hmm.
Mr. Tortoise, they're also very observant characters as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Tortoise, he saw something that just startled him, and he did the right thing, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and Mr. Bird, something happened, and he said, I'll rather stay in the sky where Mr. Goat and Mr. Dog can't fly, and let that be it. So there's some interesting things we find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, which of the animal characters, and this is for both of you, is your favorite?
Hmm.
I think mine is Mr. Monkey, because he he is he's my favorite, because he's kind of like, he's not like a snitch, or I wouldn't say an informer, but he lets people know what's going on so that others can be
Okay.
aware.
Okay. So he is a snitch. He dry
Basically.
snitches.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Akindele, who's your favorite?
I think mine is Mr. Bushcat.
Okay.
Sorry.
What? What is
I'm
going on?
sorry. I'm sorry. No,
Why?
I think, because I was looking over at Nadine. I'm sure Nadine is like, trying to.
So if I can't lie.
Yeah, I think Mr. Bushcat is like very chill. Like he's just smooth as through everything. And I
Uh-huh.
feel like you always need to have that type of character in the room in anything. Who's
Okay.
just like, like they're really the ones that know everything, but
Uh-huh.
they don't say anything, and they're just like, wow. And the whole thing just drops, and it's like boom, and everyone's running like, oh my, and they're just like,
And he just saw it coming, was just like,
yeah, he's like,
I knew that
But
was gonna happen.
no one ever asked him about anything, because they're just like, oh, that's Mr. Bushcat. He doesn't know anything, but he's just like,
Taking it all in.
yeah, take it all in. I think that's my favorite.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So, Nadine, this was your first foray into writing books. Did you like it? Do you want to write more? I mean, I know you're busy with your working on your master's right now, but beyond that, do you see yourself writing more books?
Definitely. I think we all have at least one book in us,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got that artistic flair in our genes, and I have it from both my mum's side and my father's side. My mum's an author as
Mm-hmm.
well. So yeah, I definitely do see it coming.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right. And then, Akindele, you are the co-founder of African Curator, which installs historical markers that share about the Middle Passage. So tell us a little bit about that, and where can we find some of your historical markers?
African Curator. It's a company that I started with another gentleman called Adrian
Mm-hmm.
Labor, and pretty much we do different things there. We do the historical markers. We have something called a One Journey Symposium.
Mm-hmm.
This year we had about 3 of them so far. And what they do is they bring in scholars, historians, from the U.S., from the Caribbean, from Sierra Leone, from Canada, and we talk about all these different global experiences or journeys. So we also do books there as well. We feature Sierra Leonean icons
Mm-hmm.
in those books. The historical markers, we recently did one at Zion, the church I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So we did the design, we dug the ground, we built the historical marker. And we also have something coming up this month in Freetown, because there's about 100, I think, folks from the Caribbean, from different parts of the Caribbean, going to Sierra Leone
Wow.
for Afro-Caribbean Festival. So we're also doing some markers there as well. So that's our first one. So for this first one, you have to go to Sierra Leone. to
That's
see
all
the
right with
Zion
me.
marker. So
I'm ready to go.
start thinking about it.
Yeah, hubby and I
Not just
wanted
Ghana,
to.
Sierra
Yeah.
Leone too. You know.
No, my husband and I, we wanted to go to Africa for my 50th birthday, but we were
Oh,
in the
nice.
beginning of the pandemic in 2020, so that didn't happen.
Wow.
But,
Have you gone since?
we have not.
Oh,
I have never been. We're hoping in 2 years that'll be our 25th wedding anniversary. So we're trying to plan now to go to Africa. We want to go multiple times.
do you have somewhere in mind, or is Sierra
I
Leone
do.
looking like it for you?
Sierra Leone is one place because I grew up with someone who's from Sierra Leone, so he's always talked about it. So I do want to see that. I want to see Durban, South Africa. I want to go to Ethiopia because everybody that's Ethiopian
You
that
look
comes,
like-
they see me, they tell me I'm Ethiopian all the time. We went to an Ethiopian restaurant in Baltimore, and the owner came out and starts speaking to me in Amharic, and I was like, I don't know what you're saying. And she was like, you're not Amharic? I was like, I'm New Jersey. So she was like, no. She was like, you're. And then I even took like a DNA test, and I have DNA from Kenya, Nigeria, and the Gambia. But so
Kenya.
maybe
Yeah,
since
the
Kenya
link,
is so
yeah.
close, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was just hoping I was like going to see something directly from Ethiopia, but no. So, but I want to see Ethiopia. I want to see a bunch of places. So I want to see
Sierra Leone should
Namibia.
top that. I think.
Yeah.
Not being biased or anything. But
No, really. So where can readers find your books?
Sierra Leon Folktales.com. That's the website. We also have Instagram page with the link with the websites at Sierra Leone Folktales. Yeah.
Okay. And are they on Amazon
it's not,
as well?
It's not available on Amazon just yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you do, to purchase it, you would have to go to the website itself where everything is ready, and it's like Amazon. It's just not on Amazon.
Just not good. But then all the money goes directly to you guys. There's no middleman. So I'm all for that.
Exactly.
And where can we find you on social media?
My social media is I have LinkedIn, Nadine Decker.
Okay.
What about you?
Find me on Instagram.
Okay.
Akindele Decker. Yeah.
Okay. And is there one specifically on Instagram for the Sierra Leone Folktales, or do you just prefer for them to reach out to you there?
Yeah, Sierra Leone Folktales. At Sierra Leone Folktales is the Instagram.
Okay. All right. Well, we have come to the end of our show. I want to thank you so much, both of you, for being here with me today, sharing your time and talents with us. I'm looking forward. I usually read books before I get them, and then I didn't realize that I was going to get them real quick on Amazon, and Amazon was like, we don't have them. And when I looked at your website, I was like, they're not going to get here in time. So I just had to do a whole bunch of research and read up on the website.
You did very well, though. I mean,
thank you.
was- yeah.
So, but I'm going to be ordering them so that I can have them and read them. I'm looking forward to them because the illustrations on the website are beautiful, and if they're the same in the book, I'm in for a treat.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're most welcome. And Booze and Bros, you know how I do. At the end of every show, I leave you with a quote. And today's quote is an African proverb, and it goes like this. If we stand tall, it is because we stand on the shoulders of many ancestors. Until next time, you know what to do. Grab a book and read. And I'm out.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Between the Reads. I'm your host, Audra Russell. Thanks for lending me your ear. If you enjoy this content, please consider supporting this independent podcast by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/betweenthereads or making a one-time donation at www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. That's www.ko-fi.com/betweenthereadspodcast. Tune in next week for another great episode.